Together, we work as one for better LGBTIQ lives. Outright.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am Tanisha Mary, one of the Caribbean advocacy officers at Outright. Our session is entitled Realizing the Rights of Trans and Gender Diverse People in the Caribbean. We have an exciting discussion ahead, focused on the work of trans and gender diverse activists in the region. The context for our session is the current realities of trans and gender diverse people in the Caribbean. Trans and gender diverse people in the region face significant barriers in accessing employment, education, healthcare, and social support services. They have difficulties in securing legal gender recognition and are at an increased risk of violence, discrimination, threats of or actual arrest and detention. Trans and gender diverse people in the Caribbean often encounter hostility in public spaces, and they do not have the benefit of strong legal and policy protection when their rights are violated on the basis of their gender identity and/or expression. They are negatively impacted by laws that criminalize same-sex intimacy, vagrancy, and sex work, which are oftentimes arbitrarily enforced. Notwithstanding this, trans and gender diverse activists in the Caribbean have been taking important steps toward movement building and establishing advocacy priorities. Our panel today will address the advancements made in the Caribbean and the measures taken by activists to achieve these gains. We will also explore lessons learned and what strategies can be used to ensure long-term progress for the movement. We are honored to have with us Caribbean activists who have been doing groundbreaking work. At the core of these efforts is a centering of the need for respect for human rights, the need for equal recognition, equal protection, and an equal opportunity for each person to live their lives according to their own conception of what constitutes a good life. Today, our panel consists of Alexis DeMarco, who is the Executive Director of the United Caribbean Trans Network. And Alexis will be speaking to us about the advancements made in the region regarding movement building and the measures taken by Caribbean activists to achieve these gains. We're also joined by Ray Alibi, one of the directors of the Trinidad and Tobago Transgender Coalition. Ray will share with us the intersectional approach adopted by her organization in providing services to trans and gender diverse people in Trinidad and Tobago. Ray will draw on lessons learned in recognizing the multiple and overlapping forms of discrimination experienced. There's a recognition that a person's experience of a rights violation is influenced by how their different social identities and characteristics interact, whether it's characteristics such as sex, age, income level, occupation, health, and migrant status. These all influence the impact that a right violation has. And also, we have with us Kenita Placide, who is the Executive Director of the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. Kenita will be taking us through some of the lessons learned from other movements in the region that have seen some success, and also strategies that can be used to ensure long-term progress for the trans and gender diverse movement in the region. In terms of the format for our panel, each panelist will have approximately 7 to 8 minutes for their presentation, and then we will use the rest of the time to delve into a general discussion. And here we'll have the opportunity to answer your questions, which will be in the chat. We will be ending at approximately 1:20, but if you're here and you are expecting a friend or a colleague to be here as well and you're not seeing them, go ahead. Give them a nudge, tell them to come over. And so we are going to start with Ray. Ray, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and then delve into your presentation for us? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Tanisha. Actually, my presentation is pretty much about your organization. I kept all your stuff in my head for our conversations. So I will just dive into it if you don't mind. If you'll allow me to share my screen, I'll just it'll tell me a bit about your organization and a bit of the work we have been doing and what we hope to continue doing. So is my screen being shared there? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so yeah, so I am one of the directors of the Trinidad and Tobago Transgender Coalition. As a matter of fact, it is the only registered transgender coalition or trans anything that is functional right now in Trinidad and Tobago. And as such, we have been tasked with a lot of work because the trans umbrella is such a broad umbrella, and we try to capture as much of our brothers and sisters as possible. I'm gonna move to okay, goody. So our organization was founded. Brandy Rodriguez is in the corner there. She passed away a year ago. She was really the visionary for this coalition, and it came about because she herself experienced or witnessed the stigma and discrimination that trans persons encountered when trying to access public health care. You know, something as ubiquitous as public health care. And she started doing this work maybe in the early 2000s, but it's only in 2017 our organization got registered as an NGO. Our vision is really a Caribbean where trans people are free to just be themselves, to exist, to have all the benefits of any human rights framework, to be able to have gender markers that reflect their identities. And the crux of our work really has been around healthcare and the ways in which we could have gender affirming healthcare, maybe we could have trauma sensitized transgendered healthcare. To do this, we pretty much partner with other organizations who are LGBT plus friendly or feminist organizations, whether they're local or regional. Like I said, we're the only registered NGO, but there are younger groups young people form little groups on Facebook or Instagram, and these are the TikTok, these are the other places that they use. And we work with them as well, help give them visibility, address their needs. Just earlier this year, one of the groups, they wanted to start binding, and Trans Coalition donated a considerable amount of money to help them buy binders and do this training sessions, as it were, about how to bind, how to pack, how to take care of yourself in that respect, because this is not information you're going to get just out there here in the Caribbean. We also talk a lot about sex positivity, and there's a lot of attention on sexual and reproductive healthcare, especially among sex workers, because the trans population to begin with is usually one that dominates sex work. Not necessarily by choice or design, but having the challenges of being trans on that journey often puts us on the margins of the income generating sectors of the economy, and people have to survive, so they survive. So sex positivity, taking care of your sexual health is paramount part of our work. So our constituents, pretty much we look at persons of trans experience. It doesn't matter whether you're a drag queen, you're a trans non-binary, trans-binary, gender non-conforming. What else we have there? We have, the umbrella is so huge. Wherever you fall into it, you are part of our constituents. Largely we look at trying to get those persons who are HIV positive into quality healthcare within the public healthcare system. So a lot of our work is focused around educating healthcare providers on the challenges of trans persons. We recognize that they have housing and income disparities and how that becomes a form of oppression and marginalization to the population. And having HIV-related stigma is something that discourages the population from testing or being treatment adherent. And within all of that, there comes other challenges as well. I know I have about 8 minutes, so if anybody gives me a thumbs up when I'm out of time, I can wrap up really quickly. So we really do believe that quality and equitable human care is a human right. So we are very, very passionate about seeing that our healthcare providers in the public service are educated and informed on what it is to be trans, and that experience of just getting up in the morning and walking down the road just to get an HIV test or to get medicine, how challenging that can be for someone, especially if you're a migrant. You might be a Jamaican migrant, so you speak English, but because you're a migrant, you don't have good employment or have money to travel. You might be a migrant, but you're a Spanish-speaking migrant, so your own vulnerabilities are multiplied because now you come into the healthcare space and you can't even speak the language. It is a way that all these different oppressions just come together and interlock to make it more difficult for persons who are trying to navigate the very same space. So we look at sex workers as well. We look at trans sex workers. We do work with female sex workers. Male sex workers are often, for some reason, I figure they don't have male sex workers. And we also do work with men who have sex with men. We really try to, when I say sex workers, I'm looking at all these different persons. And we also have a population that I didn't put on here, which would be a migrant sex workers. So they'll be predominantly Spanish-speaking sex workers. And they have their unique sets of challenges in terms of language barriers, in terms of being afraid of being picked up by the police and being held in detention, not being able to get employment because of the language barrier. It's just a lot of work has to be done there in terms of trying to keep them safe and at the same time we help them to provide for themselves. We also do work with non-binary trans persons. So like I said, we have the binary trans, but in between there's all of this that's happening, the agendered persons who are like myself, who may present one way but be another way. So we're just non-binary, like this gentleman here. And there are things that affect them are different, you know. They're more concerned with their gender markers. They don't want to be, the pronouns that are used when they're being addressed, like the they or the z's and the z's as opposed to he and she. So there's a lot of work around sensitization in the media and in different spaces about how to address persons who are non-binary. Workplace becomes an issue because you can't have persons who's a non-binary person who does not identify a particular gender dressing a particular way. That expression becomes a problem. So we do work as well with different companies in educating them on recognizing the right for persons to dress in a way that is still business attire, but allow them to have their gender expression, and the policies that they can make, soft policies that they can make within the workplace to allow these people to have some sort of freedom of expression and be comfortable in the workplace. And of course, I spoke about gender-informed healthcare, which is severely lacking here because there's an idea that if one, like you have HIV, well, we treat you the same way. It does not work that way if it is that you are trans and you have to dress a particular way when you have to come out of the house in the morning, if you're living in an area where you have to carry your clothes in a bag and dress in a restaurant somewhere because you're probably going to beat you up or kill you if they see you dressing outside of your assigned sex at birth in that area. So these things are things that they need to be sensitized about, and we do our part in driving educational campaigns and media campaigns to inform persons about these things. So our strategy easily is simply this. We educate, we do it via media, we do it via just outreach programs to our community members, meeting up with stakeholders and duty bearers. We try to create an environment of compassion and empathy where the other persons who are not trans persons or persons of trans experience could understand what it is to be trans, because it's a very, very different journey to be a trans person than it is to be a person of a non-heterosexual sexual orientation. Is a very, very different journey. We hope, and I'm going to make a point here, when I talk about compassion, the compassion I'm talking about here is self-compassion. So as an applied psychologist, I use my own skill, and I do workshops with persons of the community where we do this therapeutic self-healing to build self-esteem, to build awareness, to free them from the concept of cisgenderism. And then we move into occupying spaces. So we try to get out there. I always say, if you hear us talking about you on the radio, pick up the phone and call on the radio. Let them know you're here. Do not hide. Occupy the spaces. And occupying spaces, we allow ourselves to be seen in a way outside of whatever imaginations other persons have. And the whole point of all of these things, education about yourself, compassion about yourself, empathy from allies, and occupying spaces, is to bring us to a point of advocacy. It's our belief at Trans Coalition here that it's acceptance or tolerance is not our pinnacle, advocacy is our pinnacle. We want people to advocate for themselves, and we want allies to be able to advocate for us as well. Media sensitization is one of the key change components that we use. We did work, I did a gender-based violence training with the Ministry of, I can't remember which minister this is, to be quite honest. I think it was Gender and Child Affairs. And I brought the trans perspective to the conversation, because the conversation is usually about men abusing women, and we don't get to see the situations where gender-based violence is also extended to the fact that one of my constituents, one of my clients, was chopped on the side of the road because somebody clocked her, so to speak. And that just turned out into a whole situation where she was attacked with a cutlass or machete, and the whole process of gender-based violence. She couldn't get coverage on the gender-based violence laws here in Trinidad and Tobago simply because they speak about gender-based violence laws, but they do not recognize that part of gender-based violence is also a trans woman being attacked because of who she is. The concept is just very limited to some sort of domestic violence where a man is beating a woman or a woman is beating a man. The other picture to the right here where I'm talking is that was a specific media sensitization with these media houses like the traditional papers, persons who use social media and whatnot. And we were teaching them in that situation there, we're talking about how you use language, to affirm trans persons as opposed to shame them, how they take, when they write their stories, to show some respect, to bring some humanity to the people that you're writing about. It's not about some trans person pick up Friday night and have them looking all horrible with a 3 o'clock shadow Monday morning because they were loitering. To make them real people and to bring their stories into the conversation and not to sensationalize what is so painful for so many of us. So media sensitization is a really, really key part of how we strategize to change things. And I'll just wrap up by saying that you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Instagram, there's my email address, and of course my number for any questions, concerns, comments, or queries. Thank you so much, Tanisha. I think I took more than 8 minutes, I apologize.
Great. Thank you ever so much for the insights shared. Okay, so we are having a little bit of challenge. 2 of our panelists have not yet arrived. And so I'll keep waiting on feedback from the tech team to see if the issue has been resolved. But in the meantime, Ray, I don't mean to put you under any pressure. I'll just proceed with some of the general questions I was hoping to ask, and also if there are any questions in the chat. I think what has stood out for me in the presentation that you've made is just how cognizant we have to be in terms of overlapping discrimination and multiple forms of discrimination, the multiple forms of vulnerabilities that trans persons may experience. One of the main points that you did make was that trans people dominate sex work in Trinidad and Tobago. And so if the laws in Trinidad and Tobago are anything like for the rest of the region, sex work is generally, or the laws governing sex work is generally criminalized, so that there is that additional layer of criminality that is attached to one's
it's terrible. You have no idea. It could be so simple. I have to do this because you might pick up somebody who's hustling because they have to eat. Sex work is work. And you pick up this person on a Friday night, you lock them up, and they do it on purpose. Right? They come on a Friday night, they lock you up for loitering, and they have you all in front of the papers and in court Monday morning, shaming people into the shadows, the complete lack of humanity, and what makes it worse, once it's on your record now, you're a criminal, you can't get a visa, it's trouble to get a job. which puts you back on the street anyways, is the way that they just put you into this vortex of always being discriminated against and always having these multiple layers of oppression on you. It's horrible.
Yeah, and it is something that runs across quite a few countries. The problems with the use of the vagrancy laws, the use of sex work laws, the use of burglary laws that disproportionately affect some persons. And so what I'm wondering, Ray, because we're talking about movement building and we're talking about advocacy strategy, what more do you think can be done to strengthen the political participation of trans and gender diverse people, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago?
I will always say you need to humanize trans persons and gender diverse persons. As it exists right now in the minds of the public, having this conversation about, we need to have a conversation or continue having a conversation or pushing to have more conversations about what it means to be transgender, what is trans. If you ask the average person on the street what is a trans person, or what it means to be trans, they really have no idea. There's something fanciful in their heads. So for us here at Trans Coalition, a large part of our work is really about pushing that dialogue about being trans, about being the journey of trans persons, working with parents who have trans children, who are willing to learn, who are willing to understand. It doesn't matter how committed their level of acceptance may be low, but if there's enough curiosity there to want to know, we work with parents as well for young trans persons in terms of understanding how different this journey is. So really it's about humanizing. That's the very first step that we must take. I tell my constituents all the time, when you hear people talking about you on the radio and Facebook, speak up. Once they're talking about you, it means that to some degree you're relevant. You need to push that, you need to hit that button and keep talking, bring yourself into the conversation. Don't let them talk about you without you.
Indeed. And I think, visibility, there is power in visibility, and there is power in correcting misguided notions about what it means to be trans. But within the community itself, and with respect to advocacy, on issues such as legal gender recognition, on issues such as access to gender affirming healthcare. I mean, that was one of the big things that came out of your presentation, the challenges in accessing healthcare, in terms of protection from discrimination and getting adequate remedies when persons experience violence. Within the community, is there a sense of what advocacy strategies might work best? Is there a focus more on direct advocacy with decision makers? Is there a focus on documentation? I know you mentioned media campaigns. Is there mention of strategic litigation? Is there consideration of mass protest? What's the thinking in terms of an appropriate short-term, medium-term, or long-term strategy to advocate for changes?
A bit of all, actually, except the mass action protests.
Yeah.
I don't think that will work well in this cultural setting. So Trans Coalition has worked, like I said, we work with other organizations, right? So CAISO is really like the powerhouse here. They have the resources that we don't have. So we do keep an account of the violations that will be experienced by trans persons, like the woman who was chopped or the woman whose house was burned down, her dog was murdered. My goodness, you have no idea. We do keep a record of that because this is important for us when we make the arguments, when we go and we speak to the duty bearers who say, well, this is not happening, they didn't hear about this, we have that information there. CAISO has done one step further. CAISO has taken it upon themselves to actually have the same term we use, strategic litigation. So one of the things that we do at Trans Coalition is that we feed that information to CAISO and allow them to take up the cases where they can. And that is something they have been doing. So we have cases, some have been closed and some are ongoing in the court system right now. So that the issue is not just recorded, but there is some sort of legal redress to these persons. The challenge though is that a lot of persons, they're so disillusioned by the court system, the legal system here, is we go back to that thing about self-advocacy and the work that we do with the individuals in the community to build a sustainable movement. So CAIS is doing their bit with the strategic litigation. They're doing their bit with us as well. We're talking with decision makers. We are doing the documentation and the media campaigns. But there is really a need, and it's so underfunded because it's so difficult to get funding for this, to really addressing mental health issues of trans persons, because these are people who have been traumatized and living with trauma all of their lives. And to ask them when they have been chopped, spat upon, beaten up, shot at, stabbed, or whatever the case is, and we know you have a case, that we could make this case for you in court, it takes too much out of them because they're already so traumatized by everything. So a lot of the work that I do personally is that I do the mental health care. So I have like group work where I do we have like run for a cycle, 3 weeks, 6 weeks. We come together, we talk about these things, and we try to work against the notions in their head that something is wrong with you because you're not cisgendered, understanding why you don't occupy spaces because you are actually bowing to the pressure of cisgenderism. Understand that you have a human right to be who you are. Brandy always says that, but when she realized that she had a human right to be who she is, all the hang-ups she had about wanting to be a woman, to dress as a woman, to express herself as a woman, it just went away because she understood something very crucial and fundamental. That is something that I cannot give to them. It's something they have to work on, and that happens in mental health care and mental wellness. So that's so all of these things, the media campaigns, the documentation, sitting there and talking with the ministers. We had another one with the Minister of Healthcare about PrEP and how it is necessary, because this is a population that is disproportionately at risk for HIV, and how important it is for this population to have access to PrEP. That becomes part of our advocacy with decision makers as well. So we do all of these stuff, all of these things work together. There's no one thing that we do. We try to do all of them. The only thing missing there is that part about the mental wellness and dealing with the traumas of need to heal and restore trans persons.
Thank you so very much, Ray. I think it's quite important when we're thinking about advocacy, when we're thinking about political participation of communities, that we really seek to understand the need of the communities, and especially within the Caribbean context, the socioeconomic needs always come to the fore, but also the need for psychosocial support, because we are in fact asking persons to take on the risk and to face the backlash, because in a lot of times when you have progress, sometimes there is backlash. So very important to focus on and put in place measures to meet the needs of the communities. Thank you so very much, Ray. So I'm just going to do a quick check-in to see if we have any questions from the chats before we move on to our next panelist. All right, nothing so far. We have with us Kenita Placide. Kenita was introduced earlier. She is the Executive Director of the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. Kenita will be taking us through some of the lessons learned from other movements in the regions that have seen some successes and strategies that can be used to ensure long-term progress for trans and gender diverse movements in the region. Kenita, thank you ever so much for joining us, being with us for this session. You can tell us a little bit about your organization, and then you can delve into your presentation.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, many parts of the world that may be following us. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to speak on the advancements that really has been made in the Caribbean, but also globally. I think when we look at the work that we do, we certainly understood what it meant not to work in silos. There are so many different people doing things on the ground, different organizations, mobilizing community, caring community, saving community. And, many times, those persons are not necessarily recognized for the work that they are doing on the ground. When we think about Brandy and the work she did in Trinidad and Tobago, her death was felt by many. It's a loss for many. And Ray taking up that mantle, we can only say thank you, that work is not lost or dropped. When we think about the work, ECADE came about as a coalition of organizations across the Eastern Caribbean. And so with that, we actually see that we work with 29 organizations across 9 countries. A difficult thing to do at times because, you know, each country has its own autonomy. Although culturally similar, there are many differences that we can count. But what we look at most is where can we work together? And I think this is the pieces of work that we take forward. We look at the issues that people are raising, how they are raising it. The fact that all of them work on a human rights platform gives us an angle of rights. The fight is against stigma, discrimination, and violence of all our populations. And I say all because although ECADE first priority is LGBT persons, what you also find is that the other groups that are also falling under our umbrella work on food justice, work on environmental justice, work on health, access to healthcare justice. And there's the justice system itself, and why litigation and policies, continuous tracking is so important. We work not just within the Caribbean, but we also connect with groups that currently work in Africa. When we look at SMUG, we look at Trans-Bantu out of Zambia. You know, you can look at House of Chameleon out of Fiji. And so we are connecting those dots. And one of the things that we use to connect some of those dots, we're actually using the system like the United Nations, like the Organization of American States, the OAS. We have used spaces like the Commonwealth, where we are able to bring organizations together, bring people together that look at some of the very same things Ray just shared. What are the practices on the ground and what could be measured as a good practice based on impact? But even when you get a good practice, Tanisha, one of the things that we have to bear consciousness of what may have worked for you in one country may not work exactly the same in another country, even if it's voted as a best practice. What we have actually seen is the mobilizing of people on the ground. And so actually, when we think about trans activism in the Caribbean, we can look at the Trans Coalition in Trinidad. We can look at Guyana Trans United in Guyana. There's a trans wave actually in Jamaica. There is the Trans Coalition, there's a trans organization in Bahamas, but now there's actually a regional entity called United Trans Caribbean, UC Trans, that's also there. And we can count these organizations basically coming to fruition in the last 10 years. Before that, the visibility was not so broad. But even before those organizations, and I'm going to put organizations in quotes here, existence, this is one of the things I loved about Brandy Rodriguez, because they presented at HIV meetings and other meetings where other trans people were not so visible in early days, where that conversation had not taken the kind of flight it has in this day and age. So I think that even when we look at the organizing in the Eastern Caribbean, under the HIV portfolio, we had a trans person from Barbados in the name of Didi, who came to the islands back then when they had a picture, a project. It was HIV focused, because all the organizations basically developed on an HIV platform. Some of them have morphed into more, some have died, and some are still just HIV. And so we have seen that kind of evolution. But Didi Watson for the Eastern Caribbean was the trailblazer who actually encouraged the organizations to be formed back then under the HIV chapter, you know. And so each of those organizations actually, when we look at 2000, 2001, 2003, this is where those organizations came about. So we have seen an organization like United and Strong forming in 2000, registered in 2005, and still existent today. We have organizations like Grenchap in Grenada, again, still existent from that time. And so for the Eastern Caribbean, they have been a small coalition, moving the work at the national level, serving the population, providing services, and more recently realizing that HIV is just a fraction or one aspect of somebody's life. We had to think about health more broadly. And when we think about health as a Black people, we think about not just HIV, the diabetes, the prostate, the cancers, the, mental health. It has to be a wholesome picture. So we have seen where organizing in the region really flourished, but more so from 2013, 2014, we came to start seeing more and more organizing of trans people, by trans people, for trans people. What we have in this day and age is our young people actually challenging us to do more, to protect them, to be out there. The kids are growing up with no fear of identifying and saying how they feel. That is challenging our older generation, because for them, the older generation had to hide for so many years before they could be who they are. Our young people are saying, we are here. This is how I feel. I have a right to feel how I feel and to be how I am, and you need to respect that. And so it gets organizations like ours to step up and step forward, because we continuously have to ensure the laws and the society is moving at a speed that it does not cost us the loss of anyone for being who they are or just because of who they love. And so in a nutshell, this is what I could give you in terms of timeframes and where we have been developing. And we continuously cross with the policies and laws as we are looking at. A lot of the organizations are documenting violations, but they are also trying to ensure they are providing services that are also building, the individual and community at the same time. So being able to move forward on a conversation where the trans community, which we usually look as gender identity, is not necessarily a conversation we have had sufficiently in the Caribbean. And so we need to educate even our communities itself. We need to educate the community itself, but we need to educate the larger population to continue pushing those boundaries and pushing those gaps to get people to recognize, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, it does not make you it does not change your humanity. It does not change your personality. It does not change your education level or your skills. So when you hear LGBT persons or you hear trans, non-binary, don't just take them up on, what sex they have or who they have sex with or how they dress. You need to look for what actually makes them that person, the skills that you require for the job, and we have to get those conversations changing and moving in order to have real impact on the lives of the people that we continue to serve on a daily basis, but more so, even the impact on our lives as individuals at the forefront.
Great. Thank you so very much, Kenita, for those insights. I think, what I really took note of when you spoke just now was the importance of, it's almost like you're watching a flower grow or blossom. It doesn't stay at the same stage at all times. And for organizations, you have to be flexible enough for leaders to adapt and to accommodate and to recognize the younger voices, how they position themselves, how they express themselves. And also, as leaders, you create a space that helps them to flourish. And that's, when I think about the movement in the region, we have a lot of young, very visible, bold, I would say, activists. And so centering their needs and recognizing their willingness and ability to publicly say, this is how I see myself. This is my conception of a good life. As the state, you have an obligation to ensure that my human rights are protected. And so that brings us into a question that I would love to hear from you, a response from you, and also from Ray. In terms of state accountability, in terms of our duty bearers, and within the backdrop of respect for human rights, given all that you know and all the work that you both have been doing in the region, what would you say are the top 3 priorities or top 3 positive actions that Caribbean governments need to take to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights of trans and gender diverse people in the region? And I'll give each of you around 1 to 2 minutes to quickly tell us, in your own words, the top 3 positive actions that you need our governments to take.
I'm trying to figure out the top 3. I mean, I think when I think about governments or political leaders taking action, I think about legislative change that actually can ensure protections of persons. But legislation is what's written. It's not necessarily what's implemented. And there's a difference in that. I think we can also look at political leaders actually taking up leadership in what is said and how it is said. Sometimes just asking a political leader just to be able to say, we denounce all forms of violence against every single person, including LGBT persons. And that is a difficult statement to come out. So I'm not sure we have actually seen leadership from many political leaders. And so in my head, I'm spinning around trying to figure out, what would that look like for us? I mean, if all the Caribbean governments decide to come together and say, you know what, we apologize for upholding the colonial laws for this long, and we will get rid of it, maybe that will be the icing on the cake. But I do not know if I'm being a bit too outrageous, but definitely, let me just come back down to a little reality, not just up in the clouds. I think that, one, religious, the political leaders actually being able to have consultations with LGBT persons that allows us to actually engage with them and share with them, not just on a tokenist kind of way, but actually real, that allows for meaningful change legislatively, but also within community. I think that would be my biggest ask.
Great.
And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Kenita. And Ray, I'm going to give you exactly a minute to sum up for us the 3 main things, the 3 positive actions you'd love to see from Caribbean governments.
Well, I will just simply say the government has the bigger command of all resources, so they could do something I cannot do. They could educate massively, they could sensitize massively, and they could advocate massively. And they could do that by, I would love to see some hate crime laws that are specifically set, because Sasha Fierce being murdered on the corner there, that's a hate crime. That's not just some random murder. Or Brandy not being able to go into the healthcare center to get the help that she needs, and then dies a couple of days later on the side of the road. That is hate, because she went to a place where she should have gotten help and service, and instead she got treated with scorn and contempt. I would love to see hate crime laws being enacted, but beyond legislation, because that's legislation is where the work begins, not where it ends, because Cleta is right, because it doesn't mean that the minds of the hearts of the people have changed. I know they could keep it that legislation. What I want is for the mind and the hearts of the people to change. And they could do that through education, through sensitization, and we are all citizens, we are all human, and that is all they need to know. You know who's even with, what kind of clothes they're wearing, what they have between the legs. We are all humans, we are all citizens, we are deserving of the exact same rights.
Thank you so very much. A lot's coming in terms of what we need for our Caribbean governments. We need positive action. We need legislative change. We need systemic change. We also need a shift in the mindset of persons. And we also need the states to be using their resources adequately in terms of stamping out hate, because as we've heard, it's actually hate. Being denied access to healthcare, being denied protection from violence, it actually amounts to hate. Ray, Kenita, we are most grateful for the insights shared today. Thank you. And to everyone who joined us, thank you for your presence. Thank you for your participation.